Have you ever wondered if stress can affect your brain and nervous system and even cause health issues? More when we come back.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Woo and Science podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Longyear. This is my lovely better half, Dr. Meaghan Longyear. We have a practice in Jacksonville, Florida, where we see a lot of different things in our practice. We deal mainly with brain and nervous system, right, as a whole. And we look at that with a lot of different factors. We come at it from a movement standpoint, from a metabolic or kind of what food you're putting in or the energy you're using to fuel the system. And then this one over here likes to deal with the messy stuff like emotions. And we work with a lot of different things, whether it's multiple chemical sensitivities, whether it's traumatic brain injuries, concussions, seizures, all the fun stuff, ADHD with kids. And we've noticed this word stress gets used a lot in the literature, but stress is also something that's really multifactorial as well. Just like how we look at the system, you can have multiple kinds of stress, or what I like to refer to as stressors, that affect the brain and nervous system. And we have a really awesome guest on with you guys today, Dr. James Roman, who is going to share his journey and how stress played a part in that. So welcome Dr. James Roman onto the stage here. Great to see you.
It's a true pleasure to be on the podcast today. I really appreciate being here and invited to talk on this topic.
Yeah, so stress is kind of big. So for those of you guys who don't know Dr. James Roman, he's also a chiropractor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as this unravels as well. But, stress, doc, is something that from a chiropractic standpoint, we learn about. I always look at it as the 3 T's, right? The three-legged stool is what they said in school: traumas, thoughts, and toxins. And that's what leads to a subluxation, or what I refer to as an interference in the nervous system. And so those are stressors, right? You can have trauma, physical and emotional. You can have stressors that are, metabolic, or like blood sugar issues, or even chemical sensitivities. Yeah. And then you can have the emotional side of things. So that's where the thoughts come into. So toxins, traumas, and thoughts.
I'll share my experience with that. I feel like when we were in school, like everybody talked about, especially as chiropractors, everybody talked about physical stress, but we really didn't talk about emotional stress as a doctor that worked on the spine. And I feel even with a lot of functional medicine offices, because I've worked with a lot of functional medicine offices before, that the idea or the concept of stress is kind of like, it's like the last thing that people look at. It's like, let's look at your diet and nutrition and what you're eating. Let's put the chemicals that are in your environment. Maybe let's take a look at supplements that you can be taking, or medications. And the last thing that kind of everybody looks at is like stress and emotions. And I kind of feel, based with my experience, that's probably like, it's even more important than the other thing. The other factors play a huge role, but I feel like stress, and in particularly how it affects our brain and the effects of that on our brain, and how our brain responds and retrains our body to become more sensitive, I think that's probably more important than some of those other factors. They all play a role. Sure. I would say over the last few years, what I've realized is it's primary. It's probably one of the things that you have to take a look at first, as well as taking a look at some of those other things. And I think, where I kind of see the profession going, and I really see a lot of more and more functional medicine doctors and more practitioners taking on this role of understanding the brain and trying to work with it or influence at least how people's brains respond to stress,
Yeah, well, I think the brain is pretty important, right? Most people have one, and it's the master system of everything. And I love how you kind of laid that out. It brings a quote from Dr. Scott Walker, is the first person that I heard say this. And, with chiropractic in the beginning, like you talked about the evolution of our profession, all we did was adjust. And it was at a time, it was developed at a time where people were working in factories and in the fields, and everything was like a physical trauma, but they didn't have, a device dinging every 30 seconds. irritants and all of these other stressors. And then like the functional medicine revolution happened because Monsanto happened, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so you saw this huge revolution in the 80s of now we've got to figure out this chemical thing, this chemical stressor. So we went, from trauma and the physical to that part of it. And now we're in an age where stress is hitting us in a way that our brain has never been exposed to.
Yeah.
From an emotional standpoint, right? So now this kind of evolution into the emotional side of things and how we deal with that, I think is a big
for me, my own personal experience, my own health journey, I think I first learned of this through mold illness and mold toxicity, and one of the functional medicine doctors that I started seeing here locally, talked about DNRS and the limbic system, and that's when I first started to learn it. And then I was in one of your lectures at Life University, and I remember you talking about concussion. And I remember the PowerPoint. I think I took a picture of it. The symptoms on the PowerPoint of concussion and what happens to people when they experience it were the same symptoms that I was experiencing with mold illness, like literally almost identical. And I realized, like, holy shit, my symptoms are brain-based. They really are brain-based. And that was like an aha moment. And that was a couple years ago where I realized, I was like, okay, I know my body is having this physical reaction, but it's being driven by my brain. My brain is driving this whole thing. And if somebody that has a concussion or PTSD has the same symptoms, a person that has mold illness, it's not the mold and it's not the environment. It's actually my brain's reaction to the environment and my brain's sensitivity to its environment. So that was when I kind of first realized, I was like, okay, I need to spend time and energy rewiring and focusing on retraining my brain's reactivity versus trying to obsess about everything that's in my environment,
Because that obsession is driving.
No, it's the whole thing. It's driving the whole thing. So
my piece of the brain that I love so much.
I was telling one of my friend, business coaches that I just checked in with, and I was having this conversation. I was telling him, I felt like the first part of my professional career was really like sympathetic driven, which is like all like just go, high stress. We've got to control, we've got to push our will, we got to go and just, go as fast as you possibly humanly can go. Even if you can't tolerate, you're still going to go faster. And it was so forceful and driven that way, in a very sympathetic, dominant way. And now where I'm at career-wise is really rewiring it and going into like more parasympathetic activity, chilling out, taking my time, being more present, letting things happen the way they need to happen, and it was literally the first probably half a century of my life. I'm 52 right now. So probably the first 50 years of my life were all this way. And the last few years have been bringing it back over to a more patient, more slowing down, more parasympathetic activity, and more rewiring my brain to lessen the effects of stress on it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So you brought up an interesting point, and I'm gonna touch on this for a second. I love the parasympathetic activity, right? And that can look like different things. Most of the time, people think of like vagal stim. That's kind of the popular thing out there. Mm-hmm. But I'm gonna pick on that for a second because stimulating the vagus can be great. But I know one of your, and I'll call it a parasympathetic activity, is pickleball, right?
Yeah.
Really nothing parasympathetic about pickleball though, and this is where the vagal stim thing, where I kind of have an issue with everybody just stimulating their vagus, because if you don't do something to activate the prefrontal, which is where you're at with pickleball and finding something you love, that actually activates the prefrontal, which actually shuts down the sympathetic. So we've got to be careful. We can turn up the parasympathetic with vagus, but you're also taking steps to shut down the sympathetic by driving that prefrontal. And that's a big clue or big key, I think, for what you do with how you've kind of overcome a lot of those issues?
I feel like with brain rewiring and retraining the brain there's no shortcuts. You can use therapies to help assist in it, but you're not taking a shortcut. You're not going to medicate your way, and you can take supplements to kind of help it, but you're going to have to put the work in and energy in to retrain it, to use different parts of your brain to make it more creative, to get social engagement. And I mean, part of pickleball, honestly, for me, my most enjoyable moments in pickleball, it's not necessarily playing, it's being around people, to be honest with you. Like I say this, and I don't say this lightly, but I feel like pickleball came, like, it's funny because we're talking about pickleball and it's just a ridiculous sport with a ridiculous name, it even makes you laugh. It makes you happy. It makes me laugh and it makes me happy when I think about it. But it came to me when I was at my sickest moment. So I'll tell a little bit of my story if it's okay. And I'll kind of
please.
Okay. So for 20 years, I'm still an entrepreneur, but for 20 years, I was a highly driven entrepreneur. So I had a practice for 10 years that was massively successful. I had, 8 or 9 employees. I had associate doctor, almost 3,000 square foot office. And it was, constantly driving to make this thing bigger and bigger and help serve more people. And then I went through my first burnout. That was my first burnout. And I burned out on that business, and I got tired of running this big operation. And I sold that office and we moved to Denver. And what do I do in Denver? I was like, let's start a marketing agency.
Why not?
And I'm like, I'm an entrepreneur. I have this opportunity. I'm good at marketing. Let's go ahead and just start a business, start growing this thing. And I had this obsession in my mind that I always wanted to get the Inc. 500 list. I was like the 500 most fastest growing companies in the US at that particular year. And I was like, I want to do it. I want to get it, but it required me like having this massive operation, and I had a certain amount of revenue goals, and I decided I was going to do it. So I went on a tear from 2013 to 2017. We 10x the size of the business. We went from one or two employees, myself and maybe one employee, to I think 17 in 2017. And then eventually when I sold it, we had 27 team members when I sold it. So I went on this tear, and we went super big, and I got the reward, and it was like, I got number 436 in 2017. And I remember getting it. I got the letter, and it was like really cool for like a day. It was like,
and then it was next. Now I need another challenge.
It was like really cool for like a day. And I'm like, all right, what's the next mount, And so, I go on this tear, I get the Inc. 500. And then from that point, after getting the Inc. 500 and going to the award ceremony, the next 18 months were the most stressful in my entire life. I went through what comes with a success is what comes with that Inc. listing is a certain level of expectations by everybody on your organization. And so things in my company started to change that I had never had that size of a company before. So things started to change, and it wasn't fun anymore. And so I decided to sell that company like I did my other company. What do you do when you're like tired and exhausted? We'll just sell it, Go on to the next thing. So the last 6 months of selling that business. So I was selling my agency. I was running the agency. I couldn't tell anybody. And I had 2 full-time jobs. And wow. I just remember the entire 6 months having this pit in my stomach that I could never get away from. Like, it was like a tension that I could not release. And, it was a large sum of money that we were dealing with. And there was no guarantee that was going to go through until the end of until the last day of the sale. So he could have pulled out at any time. So knowing that I had no control over that, and then that constant stress wearing on me for 6 months, it was a lot. So sold the company, and I felt hungover emotionally for 6 months after that. So I sold the company, and I felt like a weird sense of like, I just couldn't, like, I felt emotionally hungover. It was the weirdest thing. Like, I was excited about it, but I felt beat up. I felt really, that I had been through the ringer. and I felt hungover for 6 months, even though I've been sober for 25 years. So I think that was the perfect setup. Knowing what I know now, I know that took a hit on my brain. I know my brain went through an emotional trauma, and I know it was just took one extra thing to just like, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And that's when we moved to Florida, did a cross country move to Florida. And then I came into contact with mold. And mold was that thing that was like my body, it was like the last stress that my body was like, I can't do it anymore. And, that's when everything broke down. And it was the hardest thing that I've ever gone through, going through mold illness. It was very challenging. It was very, very challenging. So, but that thought, like, I had to seek answers out there. And eventually, when you go through mold illness, it's where there's stages of mold illness. It's the first stage is just like, what's this mold illness thing about? Like, do I have a problem with mold? Like, it's just like, let's test and get all this stuff back, and everything comes back positive. So you're like, all right, I'm going to clean my environment. And you start trying to clean your environment. That's the next stage. And then almost always that first time you clean your environment doesn't work. And so for me, in my situation, after we remediated, I got worse. And then the next period is just, you're just frustrated and kind of broken. And finally, you just get to the point where you are absolutely broken. Like it broke me. It broke me multiple times to the point of tears and crying. And I'll just say this: I had never thought of suicide ever in I've never been one of those people that thought that would be something that would be an answer for me. But at the sickest time at my sickest point with mold illness, I realized I was at the first point where I understood why that would be a solution for somebody, because I just didn't want to feel that way anymore. And after I got to those breaking points, I started to look for, finally, like, my functional medicine practitioner was like, I think you may have a problem with your limbic system. I was spending the first hour of my day ruminating on how bad I felt.
Yeah.
Right? That was the first hour of every morning, was me sitting there ruminating on how shitty I felt. Like, that's where I was. And yes, I had a limbic problem. My limbic system was wired to everything in my brain, and it was always on the defensive. It was always looking for the shoe to drop. It was always finding an issue or a threat or something to react to. And once I started to learn about that, right around the same time, pickleball was introduced to me. And what was so awesome about pickleball is I would feel rough, but then I would go out to play and I would start to feel a little better. And I would be around people making fun of me and like telling jokes, and this is like just the community. And I was on a text thread where people would make fun of me all day and how bad I played. And like, I just started to laugh again. Being introduced to that group. And that's kind of when around the same time, right when I found you and you guys, and I started working with you probably like 6 months later. So it was a combination of like learning about the brain, learning about my faulty or poorly wired nervous system and limbic system. And the other thing I learned about that too with the limbic system is like once those nerves start to fire together, they wire together. Mm-hmm. So all that anxiety and all that depression and all that ruminating was wiring with all the different parts of my brain, because it's what I would tune into every day. And once I started to kind of disconnect those connections, and once I started to have joy in my life again, and I had people in my life again, and I got outside of myself, and I started realizing that there's other things for me to focus on. And it's a beautiful part of the story.
I love that. So you said, I know you've got, I can feel your brain.
You got neuroplasticity definition in there.
But we got energy stuff in there too that
totally.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Because you're sitting there and you're thinking about that every morning, and you're reminding yourself of how miserable you are. You're not focusing your attention and energy. You're stuck in your limbic brain.
Yeah.
Yes, physical perspective. But like, we're gonna go a little woo here, right? And like hold truth to our podcast. that law of attraction. So you're sitting
Yeah.
there attracting this. I feel like crap. I feel like crap. I don't feel good. I have all these thoughts. And of course, you're going to keep spiraling in that. Then you go and find something that you brings you joy, just like you said.
Yeah.
So bringing that prefrontal cortex in, even though you're not feeling good, but you're leveling up, you're pulling yourself out of that by doing something that, even though you weren't good at it yet, had this community and these people,
Yeah.
this camaraderie, and
Yeah.
that brought you joy. And what a huge thing for you to find to help pull you in a different direction.
We have a lot of seniors that we play with, and I feel like it's the perfect sport for seniors, and I don't call myself a senior yet, but it's getting outside and being active. It's being around a community of other people. It's seeing the same faces and caring about those other people. And it's joking and having fun. I mean, like 99% of the games I play, I have fun. Maybe 1% I don't enjoy when I lose, but I mean, it's pretty positive. So I lose a lot.
We can still be competitive, right? Even though
But it's so much fun though. It really is.
Well, finding that camaraderie, and like I love how you said getting made fun of on the text thread. That's a guy thing, right? That's how we go through life. We punch each other in the shoulder and we rip on each other, and that's how you know you've been accepted into the plan, so to speak. And it gives you that feeling of acceptance, because that's really, I mean, at the core of everything. When you get into our limbic brain, when you get into frontal lobe, that's what we're looking for. Is we're looking for acceptance. We're looking to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Connection.
And when you're connected to something bigger than you, that's what fires together and wires together to create those connections in that prefrontal.
Yeah.
And mold specifically, they've actually searched for it in the brain, and it hangs out in an area called the basal ganglia. And that's why it's even more important to fire into frontal and even more so cerebellum, which is balance and coordination, right? Which is huge on the pickleball court, which is why it's great for seniors, right? So, but it fires off and causes detoxification pathways in the immune system to actually activate. So that's where things like joy and that camaraderie actually increase your immune response. They increase the resilience of your brain and help you fight better.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, MCS, like multiple chemical sensitivity or mold illness, at the end of the day, it's a breakdown of neuroresilience, because, you and Kat were exposed to the same molds, right?
Yeah.
There's a difference between you getting, sick with it. Like
I really believe, like, I was exposed to mold previously in other places. It was because of like the sale of the company that kind of put my brain in that position. I mean, I honestly, it's probably 20 years of build up for that, but it was, multiple years of being an entrepreneur and always wiring my brain towards what's the next thing I need to be aware of, or what's the next thing I need to protect myself and my company from. After that does take a toll on you, and it lessens the resiliency of your brain to be able to come back from that stuff. And so I know it was at that specific time, my body and brain were right for that, like that last thing. And mold was just, it could have been anything. It could have been something. It could have been COVID. I could have gotten COVID and had a problem with, and gotten long COVID. It could have been anything that my body was just not ready to handle at that time. And my brain was going to be super reactive to it. So I do believe that. I feel like with patients that have autoimmune conditions, multiple chemical sensitivities, mold illness, our limbic system in those scenarios wants to get us alone by ourselves, totally safe and protected, like not around anybody. And if you can, I don't know if you can force yourself, but if you can get yourself to be, to go out, to be around a community, to talk to others and engage in it. And I think that's sometimes like part of what we did with limbic retraining. They had like a weekly Zoom meeting, and it was just great to be around other people that were trying to rewire their brain. So just being around a social environment with other people trying to do the change. I mean, I know recovery and AA, like that's part of the benefit of being around 30, 40 other people that are all doing the same thing. It starts to get your brain out of that just focused on me thing, and ruminating on that, to being around others and opening up and sharing and realizing that, like, I'm not alone in this thing. There's other people that are doing okay. I can be okay now,
Yep. It's that hope. It's giving people hope that I'm not, like you said, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that's dealing with this.
Yeah.
There's other people. And again, that community, right? We feel like we're, okay, well, you lend a hand, you give me your shoulder, I give you mine. We can hold hands, get through this together.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
Huge. It's huge. It's
Yes.
Sing Kumbaya.
Yeah.
All that stuff. We all need it, baby. We all need it.
As kind of takeaways, right, with this, because I think MCS and mold, they all play into any chronic condition, I think, suffers with the same type of things. You've said a lot of really good things. What is for somebody going through this, let's say, because I love how you laid out the journey. Let's say they're at the stage of, wait, what is this mold thing? And they've learned a little bit. And now what would be your advice to you going back through this? What would you, what have you learned that you would wish you learned earlier?
Oh man, that's a great question. So it took whatever it took for me to finally get to the point where I realized it was a brain illness. I would say I wish I don't have any regrets with it, because it all happened the way that it needed to happen. But I do wish that I would have maybe learned more or started. Like here's for an example. When that doctor at the time this is before I even met you guys. This is probably 6 months prior. She had given me this program. She said, you might want to look into this limbic retraining stuff, this brain retraining limbic stuff. And I was like, we just need to clean my environment. I just need to clean my house. You're not ready for it. I wasn't ready for it. So I think looking into that a little sooner, and I realized, like, it is the easier part, the easier way. People think the me going in and having to change myself.
Oh,
that's huge.
The hardest thing, changing yourself. And you cannot heal from mold. You cannot heal from multiple chemical sensitivity. You cannot heal from mast cell activation unless you change yourself. You can't go into this doing the same things and being the same human being. You can't heal this being the same person. The only way that you heal is change. It's the only way that you heal. So
you can't solve the problems of today with the same level of thinking that got you there.
You can't. And I think that is the challenge for people that want to heal. But it's also the beautiful thing about it, is because in order for you to experience that joy and happiness and be that healthy person again, it's going to require that you change.
Yep. Well,
that's kind of a mic drop moment. I think that's,
totally agree.
That definitely, you have to, you're the only thing you can actually fix is you.
Yeah.
Play with the outside environment and other.
It's funny. Like so I'm in some old groups still, and people reach out to me about, because I've posted some positive things about my recovery, and people reach out to me sometimes for help with that or perspective on it. And I always tell them, like, it seems like the easier, like, all the stuff external that you really want to change, which seems hard, but that's always easier than changing yourself. And ultimately the real permanent lasting health and recovery comes from you looking at yourself.
Yep. That's a true statement. I stand behind that. Behind every symptom we have, there's a story.
Yeah.
Changing the things that are in your external world or just the triggers that are telling you to look inside. What is it that's triggered inside that we need to release? Go.
That's the beautiful part of it's the sucky thing, but it's also the beautiful part about the disease is you can go down a rabbit hole. So, oh my God, it's the craziest rabbit. I don't even like talking or thinking about it because it's such a crazy rabbit hole where you're obsessing about every detail of your environment and life.
Yeah.
And you have to bottom out on that. Once you bottom out on that, you're like, it's not me trying to fix my environment more. It's me fixing my brain.
Yep. Go inside.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, guys. This is huge. And you went through mold, but you can apply this to so many conditions.
Yeah.
That are out there as far as taking care of yourself. Thank you so much for being on with us,
guys. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. We will see you next time.
Bye-bye.